بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء وبعد. We were discussing one of the stories that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah Al-Kahf. Altogether there are 4 incidents, stories from the beginning of the surah till the end that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in this surah. As we recite this surah, following the second story, a couple of pages after we recite وَضْرِبْ لَهُمْ مَثَلَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا, we go on 2 or 3 pages later. There are the ayat وَإِذْ قَالَ مُوسَى لِفَتَاهُ لَا أَبْرَحُ حَتَّى أَبْلُغَ مَجْمَعَ الْبَحْرَيْنِ أَوْ أَمْضِيَ حُقُبًا فَلَمَّا بَلَغَ. The ayat go on for almost 3 pages, and most of us, if not all of us, we get an idea that these ayat are related to Musa alayhi salam. Something is being said about Musa alayhi salam. Very interesting story, but the point I want to and we should be pondering over is trying to reflect on the message that we are being told to remind ourselves of every week. Again, because we are encouraged to recite this surah every Friday, thus there must be some message in all of these stories that Allah wants us to remind ourselves of constantly. Thus we recite it repeatedly. Thus, to reflect on this, the third story of this surah, and try to derive from it that message, or the messages, underlying messages that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to reflect upon constantly and not to forget them, more specifically in this age of technological advancement, in this age of human progression, in this age of human evolution. We have reached a point that human beings could never have imagined 100 years ago, 200 years ago, that human beings would be so sophisticated. And who knows what is going to happen in the future. Maybe a couple of years from now, 10, 15, 20, 100 years from now, how far the human race would have traveled in this journey of this life. Nevertheless, this incident is related to Musa alayhi salam, and again, we are trying to reflect on what Allah is reminding us of within this incident. We'll try to summarize the incident first, the story. Musa alayhi salam stands up in front of his people, in front of the believers, to address them. There's a question posed to Musa alayhi salam: who possesses the most knowledge? Who is the most knowledgeable amongst us, obviously human beings? Musa alayhi salam says, I, myself. And the commentators speak about this response. On one hand, it is true, he is the Prophet of Allah of his time, and obviously the Prophet of Allah, the Messenger, is given divine knowledge. His knowledge of the religion would be greater than anyone else's knowledge. This was a fact that he was merely presenting. But the commentators mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to remind Musa alayhi salam that when it comes to knowledge, it should always be attributed to Allah, associated with Allah. He is the fountain of knowledge. And the knowledge we possess, the very little knowledge we possess comes from Him. And thus, knowledge should always be attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Thus, Allah sent down this message to Musa alayhi salam, that there is an individual in my creation who possesses knowledge that you do not have. Maybe not necessarily the knowledge of the religion that you are propagating, but he possesses such knowledge that you do not possess. Musa alayhi salam becomes intrigued. He is told that you will meet him at a certain place, the coming together of the two seas, Majma'ul Bahrain. Musa alayhi salam travels with his khadim, with his student, you could say. They reach this place. Eventually Musa alayhi salam meets this servant of Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't even mention his name. Most of the commentators say he was Khidr alayhi salam. Musa alayhi salam's meeting Khidr alayhi salam. But these details, right, the detail of how this story occurred, the background of it, the Quran doesn't mention it. The Quran doesn't take the name of Khidr alayhi salam. It doesn't take the name of Musa alayhi salam's student, because the Quran doesn't mention details that are not needed for our salvation. Historical details. Quran is not a book of history. It has not been revealed to inform us of historical facts. Rather, these verses are for our reflection. So what is needed for reflection, that is what the Quran suffices with. Thus, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes on to mention this meeting and Musa alayhi salam's request when he meets this servant. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that he is a servant. فَوَجَدَ عَبْدًا مِّنْ عِبَادِنَا آتَيْنَاهُ رَحْمَةً مِّنْ عِنْدِنَا وَعَلَّمْنَاهُ مِن لَدُنَّا عِلْمًا. Like we had showered our mercy upon this specific servant, and we have given him knowledge from our knowledge, from us. Meaning Allah says, I have given him special knowledge. The knowledge that Khidr alayhi salam possessed is knowledge that human beings do not have access to. It is the knowledge of divine wisdom. Some of that knowledge was given to Khidr alayhi salam. When they converse with one another, and Musa alayhi salam requests that, can I stay with you, travel with you? And Khidr alayhi salam first reminds Musa alayhi salam and tells him that, look, you will not be able to travel with me, stay with me, and understand what I may do, the actions that I undertake. You may not be able to understand the reasons behind them. This is why it's probably not advisable that you travel with me. قال له موسى هل أتبعك على أن تعلمني مما علمت رشدا قال إنك لن تستطيع معي صبرا. Like, you won't be able to stay patient with me. Like many people nowadays, they lose patience with Allah. They lose patience with the decisions of Allah. Khidr alayhi salam is reminding Musa alayhi salam, you will not be able to be patient with me, because what I do is through divine understanding, and even you do not possess the knowledge of this. Thus, as a human who does not have access to this knowledge, you may fall into impatience. You may not be able to understand what is happening around you. Nevertheless, Musa alayhi salam promises, and he says, Insha'Allah, I will be patient with you, and I will not object to anything that happens. And they proceed. The three incidents, a very famous story. All of us know this story, where they start traveling together. They board a ship. Khidr alayhi salam breaks up the ship, pulls out some of its planks. Musa alayhi salam, when he sees this, obviously, this is something that outwardly he cannot comprehend. And even from a legal perspective, this would be wrong to do. As a prophet, as someone who is enforcing the law, this would not be permitted, to break some or damage someone else's property. This is what Khidr alayhi salam is doing. He objects to it, and Khidr alayhi salam says, see, I told you, you will not be able to remain patient with me, and you will not understand why I do things. And Musa alayhi salam seeks an excuse, and he's apologizes and says, I'm sorry, I will not object again. And they move on. He breaks the ship, and they move on, they travel. They come to a place where they come across a small child, a young child. حَتَّى إِذَا لَقِيَ غُلَامًا فَقَتَلَهُ. The Quran says, Khidr alayhi salam goes up to the child and takes his life. He kills the child. Innocent child. Obviously, this is something that's worse than just breaking up a ship, kills an innocent child, Musa alayhi salam says, you've done something horrible. لَقَدْ جِئْتَ شَيْئًا نُكْرًا. Like, how can I be patient with this? The Prophet of Allah seeing an innocent child being killed, obviously he would not remain silent, and it wouldn't be appropriate to remain silent upon this. Khidr alayhi salam said, I told you, you will not be able to understand why I am doing what I am doing. You will lose your patience. Musa alayhi salam says, there must be something behind this. This is a servant of Allah. He has knowledge, special knowledge that Allah has given him. There must be some explanation for what is happening here. They move on to the third incident, where they come to a town and they seek hospitality from that town. The people of that town are rude and they're not hospitable. They do not provide any food. They come across a wall that is leaning, looks like it's about to fall. Khidr alayhi salam straightens the wall. He repairs it and makes sure it is firm and sturdy. Musa alayhi salam cannot understand this either. He objects for the third time. And he says, these people, these were their manners. They were so rude with us. They couldn't show hospitality to us. And on the other hand, you go out of your way to help them and erect this wall once again. Khidr alayhi salam says, I told you, هذا فراق بيني وبينك سأنبئك بتأويل ما لم تستطع عليه صبرا. And he says, I will inform you shortly of the three incidents that you could not maintain patience with. You had to object. It is time that we depart. Clearly you cannot stay with me, right? Because you do not possess the knowledge that Allah has given me as to these incidents. So you will not be able to stay with me, but I will shortly tell you about all these three incidents. And when I give you this information, you will know that what I did was the most appropriate action to do. You will realize that what you were seeing was something very little, or was just the outward, you could say, surah, the outward of this specific incident. But the inward, what is truly happening, or why this happened, the reasons, the wisdoms behind it, this is something you cannot comprehend. You did not comprehend, thus you objected. And this is something you should understand. And he goes on to explain. We will not be able to explain this, and this is why we'll have to keep it for another week. But the point that inshallah we are going to get to is this story, and the reflections that we should make on is, this story will eventually tell us or show us that the knowledge we possess as human beings is very little compared to what we don't know. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. You've only been given a small amount of knowledge. One of the deceptions of today is human beings have become too dependent on what they know, to such an extent that they end up rejecting divine knowledge, divine revelation. They have become too arrogant with their own discoveries, with their own sophistication, that they have come to think about themselves or their discoveries that we don't need divine knowledge. We don't need revelation. We don't need the divine to tell us what is right and wrong for us. And this arrogance is based on this deception that our knowledge is extensive. Our experience and observations and our experiments have brought us to this point where we have become self-sufficient as human beings. This story will teach us that this is a grave deception that human beings may fall into. And the fact that knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala possesses, the knowledge of divine wisdom, is something that we do not have access to. And understanding this story and reflecting upon it may save us from many tribulations that people are falling into, especially the tribulation of objecting to Allah's decisions. Even Muslims are falling into this now. They cannot understand or they cannot come to terms with what is happening in the world. And it comes on their tongues, why did Allah do this? How is this happening with the Muslims? Why is this happening? Right? They start making these type of comments. And one of the reasons is because we lack reflection of this incident. And this incident will relieve us from that anxiety, inshallah. So we will have to continue. May Allah make it easy for us and allow us to reflect further and understand the underlying messages. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين.
الحمد لله الذي فطر الخلق على ما تستحسنه العقول وأيد ذلك بما أنزله على الرسول ففطرة الله التي جبل الناس عليها خلقا أمرهم بها تعبدا وشرعا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له عجزت عن إدراك حكمته الألباب وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله المبعوث بالحنيفية ملة إبراهيم الذي اجتباه ربه وهداه إلى صراط مستقيم صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن سار على نهجهم القويم وسلم تسليما أما بعد فيا أيها المؤمنون اتقوا الله سبحانه وتعالى وأقيموا وجوهكم للدين حنفاء متمسكين بالفطرة التي فطر الناس عليها وهي طهارة الباطن والظاهر فأما طهارة الباطن فهي تطهير القلب من الإشراك وإخلاص العبادة لله وحده والقيام بالأعمال الصالحات وأما طهارة الظاهر فمنها ما في صحيح مسلم عن عائشة رضي الله تعالى عنها أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال 10 من الفطرة قص الشارب وإعفاء اللحية والسواك واستنشاق الماء وقص الأظفار وغسل البراجم ونتف الإبط وحلق العانة وانتقاص الماء يعني الاستنجاء قال الراوي ونسيت 10 إلا أن تكون المضمضة وفي حديث أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه أن الختان من الفطرة فهذه الأشياء 10 كلها طهارة وتنظيف تقتضي بها الفطرة وتستحسنها العقول كما أن الشرع قد جاء بها وحث عليها فمنها قص الشارب وإحفاؤه فإن بقاءه يجمع الأوساخ التي تمر به من الأنف فإذا شرب الإنسان تلوث شرابه بها فجاء الشرع والفطرة بإحفائه وأما إعفاء اللحية وهو عدم التعرض لها بقص أو حلق أو نتف فلأن الله خلقها تمييزا بين الذكور والإناث وإظهارا للرجولية والقوة ولذلك لا تظهر إلا عند الحاجة إليها في وقت قوة الإنسان والجلده وتكليفه بمهمات الأمور أما في حال الصغر فلا تظهر لأنه حينئذ لا يتحمل الأعباء فجاء الشرع والقدر والفطرة بوجودها وإبقائها وقد أمر النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بإعفائها وإرخائها وتوفيرها وقال خالفوا المشركين وفروا اللحى واحفوا الشوارب وكان صلى الله عليه وسلم وأصحابه قد هدوا إلى الفطرة فكانوا يوفرون لحاهم وخير الهدي هدي محمد وأصحابه فإنهم على النور المبين والصراط المستقيم فحلق اللحية عمل غير صالح لأنه خروج عن الفطرة ومخالفة للرسل وأتباعهم وموافقة للمشركين وتغيير لخلق الله تعالى بلا إذن منه وليس إبقاء اللحية من الأمور العادية كما يظنه بعض الناس وإنما هو من الأمور التعبدية التي أمر بها رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم والأصل في أوامر النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم التعبد والوجوب حتى يقوم دليل على خلاف ذلك. قال الله تعالى: فليحذر الذين يخالفون عن أمره أن تصيبهم فتنة أو يصيبهم عذاب أليم. بارك الله لنا ولكم في القرآن العظيم، ونفعنا وإياكم بالآيات والذكر الحكيم. أستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه، ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له، ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله تعالى عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى مخبرا وآمرا: إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك، وصل على المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات، خصوصا على أمير المؤمنين سيدنا أبي بكر الصديق رضي الله تعالى عنه، وعلى أمير المؤمنين سيدنا عمر بن الخطاب رضي الله تعالى عنه، وعلى أمير المؤمنين سيدنا عثمان بن عفان رضي الله تعالى عنه، وعلى أمير المؤمنين سيدنا علي بن أبي طالب رضي الله تعالى عنه، وعلى سيدة نساء أهل الجنة فاطمة الزهراء رضي الله تعالى عنها، وعلى سيدي شباب أهل الجنة الحسن والحسين رضي الله تعالى عنهما، وعلى الستة الباقية من العشرة المبشرة، وعلى أمهات المؤمنين، وعلى سائر الصحابة والتابعين رضوان الله تعالى عليهم أجمعين. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين، اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين، اللهم انصر من نصر الإسلام والمسلمين، واخذل من خذل الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم اجعل بلاد الإسلام آمنة مطمئنة من كل البليات والآفات. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم، وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم، برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين، والحمد لله رب العالمين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. فاذكروني أذكركم واشكروا لي ولا تكفرون. भाई जल्दी से आगे आ जाओ, इस तरफ बहुत खाली जगह है, जगह पुर कर लो जल्दी से। बाहर जो आदमी खड़े हैं वो अंदर आ जाए।
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن محمد رسول الله، أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر، لا إله إلا الله.
الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين والسماء ذات البروج واليوم الموعود وشاهد ومشهود قتل أصحاب الأخدود النار ذات الوقود إذ هم عليها قعود وهم على ما يفعلون بالمؤمنين شهود وما نقموا منهم إلا أن يؤمنوا بالله العزيز الحميد الذي له ملك السماوات والأرض والله على كل شيء شهيد إن الذين فتنوا المؤمنين والمؤمنات ثم لم يتوبوا فلهم عذاب جهنم ولهم عذاب الحريق إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات لهم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار ذلك الفوز الكبير. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم. سبحان ربي. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. إن بطش ربك لشديد إنه هو يبدئ ويعيد وهو الغفور الودود ذو العرش المجيد فعال لما يريد. هل أتاك حديث الجنود فرعون وثمود بل الذين كفروا في تكذيب والله من ورائهم محيط بل هو قرآن مجيد في لوح محفوظ. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله. سبحان ربي العظيم. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. اللهم 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 اغفر لي مغفرة. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. استغفر الله. استغفر الله. لا إله إلا هو الحي. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله سيدنا محمد وآله وأصحابه أجمعين. وربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. وربنا اغفر لنا ولإخواننا الذين سبقونا بالإيمان ولا تجعل في قلوبنا غلا للذين آمنوا ربنا إنك رؤوف رحيم. اللهم وفقنا لما تحب وترضى واجعل آخرتنا خيرا من الأولى. اللهم حبب إلينا الإيمان وزينه في قلوبنا وكره إلينا الكفر والفسوق والعصيان واجعلنا من الراشدين. اللهم اجعلنا من الذين لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. اللهم اغفر لحينا وميتنا وشاهدنا وغائبنا وصغيرنا وكبيرنا وذكينا وأنثانا. اللهم من أحييته منا فأحيه على الإسلام ومن توفيته منا فتوفه على الإيمان. يا فاطر السماوات والأرض أنت ولينا في الدنيا والآخرة. توفنا مسلمين وألحقنا بالصالحين غير خزايا ولا ندامى ولا مفتونين. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلقه سيدنا محمد وآله وأصحابه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.